Right, welcome back to another episode of Gramercy. This is the second part of my guest intervention in the city. After this episode, the save aim is already on its way to Bsquiklehausen's, computer, I'm guessing. And I can't wait for him to see what I've done so far. At the time of this recording, all I've done is send him some screenshots and was super happy about it. But yeah, I really can't wait to hear his thoughts once he gets into the city, and I also can't wait to hear your thoughts. Because taking over someone else's project, it's sometimes it could go great, and sometimes it could be like terrible because people are used to like a certain technique for detailing things in this case. Since we've been doing FPS for quite some time, I'm guessing that's not that big of a deal, and that's one of the reasons why I chose to work together with Jay and Flux, because I guess we have similar styles of build. Each one of us with its own little details and different ways of doing similar things. But I digress. In this episode, man, if you like details, this episode is just going to be amazing. In fact, it's one of the longer episodes I've done recently, mainly because I knew I needed to send the save back to him, but I also wanted to finish a big part of Gramercy so that he wouldn't have to worry about detailing things like that. In fact, we've been talking a lot about this because I noticed that he had gaps pretty much throughout the whole city, and I was like, okay, dude, I'm gonna focus on this area of the city. And I'm gonna just complete all these like empty fields that you have pretty much throughout this neighborhood. So that way you can call this done and you don't have to worry about it. And then you can move on to finishing other great parts of this project. Now, let me talk about this pedestrian path that I'm using on the screen right now. It's a new asset, or relatively new. It came out in the workshop, I would say, a couple weeks ago at the time of the release of this video, that would be. And it's great. It's like a really thin pedestrian path that unfortunately sections of this path would have to be deleted. For some reason, like that curve right by the key, after I reloaded the save game, because I had to record this in several segments. You probably won't notice that because I'm a perfect video editor. Actually, not at all, but when I would reload the save, all these paths, including this one too, the one that's sort of surrounding this little park here, they glitch out in a way where the whole ground was totally sunken to like the core of the map, and I just had to delete them. In fact, it was causing flooding. I don't know, I think there's like a lot of road segments kind of forcing the land, and the game is not super happy about it. Also, given the size and the location of the map, I've noticed sometimes that when you start working on things sort of outside of the boundaries of the game, the 25 tiles that you get in the middle, which we all use, 81 tiles mod to unlock more space. But, working outside of those bounds usually causes some glitches. Not recently, haven't noticed them a lot, but I don't know, I have no idea where in this city or where in the map this neighborhood is located. So it could be like farther away or it could be in the center. But point is, these sidewalks are causing some issues. So I would recommend not to use them to force the ground too much. And I think it'll be fine. All these like middle ones, the pedestrian roads that I'm using, in between the roads, and those are fine. Those work fine and they will stay there. But the ones that were closer to the water and the keys, pretty glitchy for the most part. Another thing that I'm doing, as you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm adding a lot of trees just to create this brand new park. It's everything I wanted this whole neighborhood to have like spankly. Is that the word? Like basically brand new. I know there's a word for that. Just brand new urban development. All these roads, all this is gone, by the way, including this monument here, which I think it's a vanilla monument, if I'm not mistaken. But I ended up using the prop. What's the name of the prop it up? Yes, that's the name of the mod. To remove all the excess quote-unquote garbage that came attached with it. You know how much I like generic buildings that don't have a whole lot of detail. That's kind of my thing. And so for some reason that was like really glitchy as well, so I had to remove those pedestrian roads. But just stay tuned for the cinematics, because you're going to be able to see how that whole area came out. Now, another thing that I'm doing here is extending these docks because the actual asset itself is like really narrow for my taste, I guess. It doesn't look super realistic if the extension of the pier towards the sides is not long enough. I mean, those garage doors, I think they would potentially fit a truck, right? And you need some space to maneuver those trucks. With the space given by the asset, I don't think that's enough. So I extended them a little bit, just a touch, not a lot. In fact, at first I extended them a bit too much, but then retraced them back a bit so they're closer. I was sort of copying the piers that are on the Hudson River in Manhattan. And in fact, that was one of Jay's suggestions. And there's a whole bunch of piers, like the one you saw me at there with the, just the base of the pier that got burned forever ago. And Jay was telling me that the city just decides to keep them like that, not really even bothering removing the burnt pylons because, it's just expensive. There's no point on just spending a lot of money for some like pieces of wood that are sticking from the water, and it really doesn't bother anyone. Though I have seen, I've noticed that they do put some like buoys basically around them so that boats can pretty much avoid them, because maybe at night they're not super visible. During the day they're like very clearly visible. In fact, you can see them from Google Maps, even though they're just barely above the water level, but definitely a hazard for certain situations. Now, moving on to this corner of the map, there's a lot of spaces in between the area that I was working on a second ago and this space right here with the skate park. And I pretty much scatter like tiny little parks with their own kind of theme, pretty much on most of these empty lots. And I was also adding a few details to some of the buildings around them. You're gonna see me in just a second do that. I'm not sure if I recorded that. I think I did. I certainly skipped a lot of the work that I did, mainly because, one, it was a little bit repetitive. I tend to just skip things that I do over and over again. But, I also wanted to keep the episode short. And this one is already like pretty long compared to the types of videos I've been doing lately. I've been really, really happy with this super short format thing. And this one was like, okay, since this is a guest episode and I don't know if I'll ever do one again, let's just try to make the most of it and, take advantage of that. So now here, I'm going back with my classic style of adding concrete expansion joints. And I actually, at the time of this release of this video, I already recorded an episode of FVS where I use these like theme decals that just basically give you this like aesthetic from the base theme texture. So Jay is using the Cedar Valley 4K theme that the concrete texture has its own expansion joints. However, he's replacing those with the Sinu pavement, which is completely flat using Theme Mixer. However, the mod that Ronix made just still uses the original theme concrete, which has expansion joints. The reason why we don't use that anymore, by the way, also in FBS, is because if you use the built-in expansion joints from the map theme, you just get like weird angles, and it just doesn't look very realistic. So instead, we opted to use this super flat Sinu concrete texture and our own concrete expansion joints manually. However, using this theme from Ronix, and I'm getting to the point in just a second. I know I'm like going on all these weird tangents, but it just you can rotate the expansion joints to whatever direction that you want, and since they retain, they kind of fade out too, so they blend in with pretty much anything that you had before, and that's one of the main reasons why I keep using them, and just keeping the Cedar Valley 4K theme as a base theme. But I think eventually I'll try another one. Obviously, this is not my project. I didn't, call all the shots here, but in future projects, I'll definitely will. I guess I'm doing something similar with my Miracle Mile series, but you know what I mean. Now, this building right here, this was already there, was put together by Jay, and all I did was just add a few more decals around it, just so that, there's a bit more vegetation. I noticed that some of these roads were lacking trees, but at the same time, since this neighborhood used to be an industrial area and there wasn't really a lot of vegetation, most of the trees are really, really young and sparse. So, those leafy trees that I just added there, I then realized that maybe that doesn't make that much sense. Let's instead replace them with the birch trees. And that actually made it look much, much nicer. These are the only young trees that Jay had in his collection. I like them, but they're very contrasty compared to everything else. They're like much more saturated than all the other trees. So I don't know. I'm not sold 100%. I would say I'm 80% of the way there, but they do look nice. And I think they, as I add more throughout this episode, they started making a bit more sense. At first I wasn't sure, but then I was like, you know what? Like this is okay. Now this courtyard in between this big block of buildings, originally I think Jay only did like an L-shaped building on one of the corners, and since the block was a bit larger, the options that I was thinking of were to add a parking lot. But most of the buildings around this area don't have parking lots because, I guess people don't drive a lot. I know I talked about this in the previous episode of Gramercy, but for the most part, people, ride or use public transit. So in this case, I decided to leave the, just duplicate that L-shaped building and just add a little courtyard with some vegetation in the middle. And I think that was a much better solution. However, talking about parking lots, and literally, as I said, that there are not that many parking lots, I'm going to build a huge parking lot underneath this freeway. So this freeway had a gap kind of underneath where buildings don't quite reach to them, and the layout of the roads is somewhat separated. So, one option is to fill them with trees, but I realized that we have a pretty intense height difference between the lower part of this area and the upper part, I guess. So using that to my advantage, I basically took an idea from something that's actually really common in Buenos Aires. And I think I've seen like areas like this in New York as well, where you just simply have parking lots underneath some of these urban freeways. And it's not like a huge parking lot that's going to be like following the entirety of the freeway, but just enough that I can add some detail without, destroying or adding a million trees just on the surrounding areas. And in this case, since it was really hard to sort of work underneath the freeway, I decided to just move them, like literally doing like open heart surgery here, like pretty much breaking open the freeway. Eventually, I ended up deleting the segments because it really wasn't. Didn't make sense to just open them. It was easier to just straight up delete them and put them again. And I'm using this parking lot roads here that are wide, and they pretty much connect to everything else around it much more nicely. Originally, I wanted this road to sort of connect on the both of the bike lane roads, but I was getting all kinds of glitchy terrain issues, so I decided to disconnect that, turn the the road that climbs up to be a bridge. In fact, it doesn't move the terrain a lot, so it gives you first of all, it gives you the fence on the side to protect bikers and cars from like going into the train tracks over there, and it just adds more detail as well. And then I ended up manually adding a ton of pillars here to sort of sustain the weight of the freeway. And I wanted the pillars to sort of sit in random parking spaces, and obviously not on the road. So everything that you see here is like mostly calculated. The worn texture in the middle of the parking roads. It's where the cars would drive. So you can see that there's no pillars there, and the pillars are only located on the actual parking spaces. And I decided to extend the parking lot using a different texture towards the other side. But as you can see, everything looks like it belongs. Everything looks like, yes, this actually makes sense. It does look cool even when you like destroy the freeway, all these like pillars standing there on their own. And I didn't add any handicap spots here because I figured like people with disabilities wouldn't necessarily park here. They would have dedicated spaces near their home or near shops. But I did add some spaces for electric cars because that's a thing now. And they're everywhere. At least in LA, they're everywhere. I'm pretty sure. I haven't been to New York in a couple of years, but I'm sure there are many places for those as well. And also wanted to use these jersey barriers and delineators to sort of mark where the path of the bicycle lane would continue as you go through this parking lot road. When you connect the parking lot road, like all the markings are completely gone. So I needed somehow or some way to show where the bikes would still ride through, because they actually do. And I don't know if I capture that in the cinematics at the end, but there's certainly traffic that goes through that little gap that I made between the delineators and the jersey barriers. And since I had this tall height difference, I decided to use this technique that I've been perfectioning in both FBS. Actually, haven't seen that in FBS yet at the time of the release of this video, but you will in just a few weeks, if not less. But and also did that on Miracle Mile. I love these concrete walls. I know I say that on every single episode, but I really do. And it really doesn't take all that much work to get a really awesomely detailed scene. Just by adding a few props and putting the wall and bushes, and you're pretty much done. Now, since I didn't want that park to be... So, okay, let me back up a bit. In general, New York real estate is pretty, high. It's at a premium. So you don't tend to find like random spots of like grass and like nice areas that are not developed. So the excuse for that area that I was working on a second ago, even though this one looks exactly the same, was just to put a tank there, which could mean that that's like sewer systems or something like that, some like public utilities for the city. And they just like pretty much landscape around it so it doesn't look like an eyesore, especially because there's a trendy neighborhood kind of popping up nearby. You wanted to keep things looking nice for the most part. And talking about nice neighborhoods, this is like so gentrified, it's not even funny what I'm about to do here. So these abandoned train tracks that Jay has put, I barely touched them, but what I did is just add a few like grass clusters. And then on this little gap, which I'm sure you already saw it on the thumbnail, and the title of the video will give you an idea to what this is, I decided to use one of these Arrowhead Junction boxcars that Jay made, and use this little space to turn it into a hipster coffee shop for the most part. I think that was a great idea. I was trying to look for like signs on what to put. Jay did had a lot of signs on the collections. Some of these billboards that say coffee and bread and stuff like that. So I pretty much created a store out of this boxcar. I didn't have like an asset that's a window that you can put in, but I did have like an awning, like a little roof that I'm going to try my luck on in just a few seconds. And I think it ended up looking quite nice. It does look like it's closed, unfortunately, but I don't know. I thought it sells the idea on this being a trendy coffee shop, especially with the grass like being so perfect underneath. In my mind, I thought it was like AstroTurf. For those of you who don't know, that's like fake grass, like the kind of grass that they use on like soccer fields, like artificial grass, I guess you would call it too. And at first I used like an umbrella for the little roof where you would order your coffee. But then I ended up changing it with like a much nicer awning. And another thing that I haven't talked about is like these city bike stations. These are all over New York. Actually, they're all over most cities now. From like Europe to LA to South America, they're everywhere. So just got some assets and just put them down, and I think it looks nice. Obviously, we had a duplicated parking meter thing here that in my mind could have been the the little machine that you have to interact with to actually rent one of these bikes. And that asset looks great for that. And moving on with construction areas, simply because this neighborhood is changing so much. And I kind of covered this in the previous episode, but I decided to do another lane block here where, in this case, it's almost done, I would say, because it's like fresh pavement on their ground. You can see the difference in texture, and the steel plates on basically located where the roads sort of connect. So that cars can drive through it. I'm sure there's still an open hole there. But I thought that was a nice, realistic thing to do. And I think we're slowly approaching the end of the episode, and there's a few things that I wanted to talk about. So first of all, given the music that I chose and the little time that I had to edit this video, I couldn't do a lot of super long cinematics. So if you want to see all of this in detail, I took 20 or 30 screenshots, so you can see everything that I built, including the things that I didn't actually capture on camera. And there's going to be a link in the description for you to check those out. Now, if you are interested in following Gramercy and you're still not following Bsquiklehausen, I encourage you to subscribe to his channel. And there's also a link below, even though it's probably popping up on the screen as well. But this was a ton of fun. I hope he invites me again, because it's a nice change of pace from the projects that I've been working on so far, and just gives you a lot more motivation to work on something that's already kind of built, and all you have to do is just add details to them. But if you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, well, you know what to do. There's a big thumbs up button that you can click, and that actually feeds my ego tremendously, so I appreciate that. And if you're new to the channel, if you're coming from Jay's channel and you haven't already subscribed to mine, maybe you should, because I tend to do episodes like this all the time. But that's pretty much all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.